Why is the Pentagon going to ask Congress for an additional $200 billion?
Well, we're asking for a lot of reasons beyond even what we're talking about in Iran. This is a very volatile world, and the military equipment, the power of some of this weaponry is unthinkable. You don't even want to know about it. Oh, you could end this thing in 2 seconds if you wanted to, but we are being very judicious. We want to be sure, and it's a small price to pay to make sure that we stay tippy top.
Do you intend to potentially put U.S. troops or more troops in the region?
No, I'm not putting troops anywhere. If I were, I certainly wouldn't tell you, but I'm not putting...
Breaking news. The Pentagon is asking Congress for an additional $200 billion to fund the ongoing military campaign against Iran. $200 billion. That is not a rounding error. That is not a placeholder number. That is the figure the Washington Post first reported, a number that, by the accounts of people who should have known about it in advance, came as news to both the House Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader. The reaction from Congress has been immediate and bipartisan in its skepticism. Senate Majority Leader John Thune told reporters they are going to have to show us how they want to use it. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska said she does not know how long this is going on, whether there will be boots on the ground, or what the full cost will be. Republican members of the House, including Lauren Boebert, are saying publicly they will not vote to authorize any more money. This is the moment that every military campaign eventually reaches, the moment when the cost of continuing becomes a political question that Congress cannot avoid answering. And the $200 billion figure is forcing a war funding debate that will become, in the words of one senior analyst, the soundtrack of the midterm election campaign. Meanwhile, President Trump says he is not putting troops anywhere, and yet 5,000 Marines are currently en route to the region. General Frank McKenzie has reportedly suggested that Marines could seize Kharg Island as a bargaining chip, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth told reporters simply, "It takes money to kill bad guys." Tonight, we break down exactly what is happening on Capitol Hill, what the $200 billion request actually signals about the trajectory of this conflict, and what the debate over boots on the ground really means. I'm Hannah Blake. This is Global News Diary. Let's get into it. The Pentagon's request for $200 billion in additional war funding is not just a budget line item. It is a strategic signal. And the signal it sends about the anticipated duration and scope of Operation Epic Fury is one that members of Congress on both sides of the aisle are struggling to process. $200 billion is the kind of number that defines conflicts, not skirmishes. It is the kind of request that comes with a long tail, extended operations, sustained logistics, replacement of expended munitions at scale, ongoing intelligence collection, force protection across a theater that now stretches from Iran to Lebanon to the Gulf to the waters of the Strait of Hormuz. A $200 billion supplemental request is not the financial footprint of a campaign that ends in weeks. It is the financial footprint of a campaign that plans for contingencies extending well beyond the immediate phase of operations. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was asked directly about the figure. His answer was characteristically direct. It takes money to kill bad guys. They are going back to Congress to ensure proper funding for what has been done and what may have to be done in the future. That phrase, what may have to be done in the future, is the part of his statement that is generating the most concern on Capitol Hill, because it implies that the administration is planning for scenarios that go beyond the current air campaign, scenarios that have not yet been fully briefed to the legislative branch that is being asked to fund them. Senate Majority Leader Thune's reaction, they're going to have to show us how they want to use it, is telling in a specific way. It is not a refusal. It is a demand for justification, a request for the kind of strategic briefing that should, in a normal legislative executive relationship around war powers, have preceded the public announcement of a $200 billion ask rather than following it. The fact that both the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader were apparently not consulted before the number leaked to the Washington Post is itself a significant diplomatic failure within the governing coalition. You do not ask Congress for $200 billion without first building the relationships that make that ask survivable. The $200 billion request has done something politically significant. It has created a genuine bipartisan coalition of skepticism that cuts across the usual fault lines of Washington war debates. From the Republican side, the concerns are primarily strategic and economic. Republican senators are openly expressing frustration that the administration does not appear to have been fully prepared for the energy repercussions of launching this campaign, the oil price spike, the Strait of Hormuz disruption, the knock-on effects on global commodity markets that are now showing up in mortgage rates, consumer prices, and economic indicators that matter to voters. Mortgage rates just jumped to their highest level in more than 3 months. Gas prices are elevated. The economic pressure is real, and it is visible to constituents. Lauren Boebert and other House members on the right flank of the Republican caucus are saying they will not vote to authorize additional money under any circumstances. That is not a negotiating position. That is a statement of principle or political calculation that removes votes from the majority and forces the administration to find Democratic support to pass anything, which leads to the Democratic side of the equation. Democrats have consistently argued that this war was launched without proper congressional authorization, a war of choice in their framing begun without the legal foundation that the Constitution's war powers provisions require. Asking those same Democrats to vote for $200 billion to fund the war creates a genuinely complicated set of choices for Democratic leadership. Voting yes gives the war political legitimacy that Democrats have been withholding. Voting no leaves American forces in the field without the resources to complete their mission. The reality that senior analysts have been noting for days is now crystallizing in this vote. Any supplemental war funding bill will require bipartisan support to pass. And building that coalition, convincing both skeptical Republicans concerned about costs and skeptical Democrats concerned about authorization, is a political lift that the administration has not yet demonstrated it is prepared to make. President Trump, when asked directly whether he intends to put additional U.S. troops in the region, was unequivocal. No, he is not putting troops anywhere. He added the caveat that if he were planning to do so, he certainly would not announce it publicly, a reasonable operational security point. But he was clear that no ground deployment is currently planned. And yet 5,000 Marines are currently en route to the region on the USS Tripoli and associated vessels. The tension between those two statements is not necessarily a contradiction. Marines en route to a region are not the same as Marines being deployed to execute a specific ground mission. Positioning forces creates options. It does not commit to their use. The principle of strategic ambiguity, not telling adversaries what you will and will not do, is a legitimate and important element of military strategy. As Major John Spencer of the Madison Policy Forum noted directly, the worst thing a commander can do is tell the enemy exactly what they are and are not willing to do. But the political reality of 5,000,000,000,000,000 a gap that Congress is going to force the administration to close, either by explaining what the Marines are for or by being asked that question under oath in the supplemental funding hearings that are now inevitable. General Frank McKenzie's reported suggestion that Marines could seize Kharg Island, Iran's main oil export hub, responsible for 90% of the country's oil revenue, and hold it as a bargaining chip adds another dimension to this picture. Seizing Kharg Island would not be a symbolic gesture. It would be the physical seizure of the economic throttle of the Iranian state. It would give the United States direct control over the lever that determines whether Iran can fund its military, pay its proxies, and sustain the regime's basic functions. Is that boots on the ground? Major Spencer's answer was precise. It depends on what you mean. The core Marine Corps mission is to seize an island and hold it. That is what Marines train for. Whether seizing Kharg Island constitutes a ground invasion depends entirely on what happens after the seizure, whether it becomes a sustained occupation, whether it triggers a wider commitment, whether it opens the door to the kind of nation-building mission that led 170,000 troops into Iraq. Spencer was emphatic that he does not believe the current administration is considering anything resembling that scale of commitment. Running through every dimension of the $200 billion debate is a constitutional question that has been building since the first bombs fell on Iran. Congress never voted to authorize this war. That is not a technical complaint. The War Powers Resolution of 1973 requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of committing U.S. forces to hostilities and limits unauthorized military action to 60 days without congressional approval. Operation Epic Fury is now in its third week within the 60-day window, but the administration has not sought a formal authorization for the use of military force from Congress. The $200 billion supplemental request is, as one senior analyst described it, the moment when the funding debate becomes the authorization debate. Congress has the power of the purse. If Congress funds the war, it has effectively authorized it, regardless of whether a formal AUMF was ever passed. That is the political and constitutional reality of how wars get legitimized after the fact in the American system. Senator Murkowski's public statement asking how long this is going on, whether there will be boots on the ground, what the objectives are, to what extent Congress is engaged, is the sound of a legislator who understands that the funding vote is the authorization vote, and who is not yet ready to cast it without the briefings, the strategy presentation, and the endgame definition that have not yet been provided. Senate Majority Leader Thune made the same point differently. They are specifically going to have to go through why the war was necessary now and what the objectives are going forward. That is a demand for a case to be made, not just a budget justification, but a strategic rationale. Why this? Why now? How does it end? What does victory look like? And what happens the day after victory? Those are not unreasonable questions. They are the questions that should have been answered before the first bomb fell and that are now being demanded before the next $200 billion is appropriated. The congressional debate over war funding does not happen in a vacuum. It happens against the backdrop of an economy that is absorbing the effects of the conflict in ways that are showing up in data points that voters notice and that members of Congress hear about from constituents. Gas prices have risen since Operation Epic Fury began. Oil markets are elevated and volatile, reflecting uncertainty about how long the Strait of Hormuz disruption will last and whether Iranian strikes on Gulf energy infrastructure will escalate. Mortgage rates just jumped to their highest level in more than 3 months, a data point that arrives directly from the financial markets assessment of the economic risk environment. Republican senators are openly expressing frustration, not about the military objectives of the campaign, but about the energy repercussions. The administration, they suggest, was not fully prepared for what launching a military campaign against the country sitting astride the world's most critical oil choke point would do to global energy prices. The president has insisted he anticipated the economic consequences and that things could have been worse. Whether that is true and how you define worse when mortgage rates are at a 3-month high and gas prices are elevated is a matter on which the administration and skeptical members of Congress are not yet aligned. The political timeline matters enormously here. The $200 billion request, if it becomes the central debate of the coming months, will be the dominant issue in the midterm election campaign. Every member of the House who votes on that supplemental, every senator who goes on the record about authorizing the continued funding of this conflict will carry that vote into their next election. Republican members from districts where gas prices are a top voter concern will be voting with one eye on those prices. Democratic members who oppose the war from the beginning will be voting with one eye on their base, which is deeply skeptical of any expansion of American military commitments abroad. The intersection of those political pressures with the genuine strategic questions about the war's objectives and endgame is what makes the $200 billion debate one of the most consequential legislative moments of this administration. The convergence of events now facing the White House, the $200 billion request, the congressional skepticism, the Marines en route, the Kharg Island option on the table, the economic pressures building, represents a test of political and military leadership that is qualitatively different from anything this administration has faced so far. Winning on the battlefield and winning the political argument for funding the battlefield are two completely different challenges. The military campaign has, by every objective measure, been extraordinarily successful. More than 7,000 targets struck, Iran's Navy eliminated, its Air Force destroyed, its defense industrial base being dismantled, its missile capability reduced by 90%, its leadership decapitated. By the metrics of military achievement, Operation Epic Fury has exceeded expectations, but military success does not automatically translate into congressional support for $200 billion in additional funding. It does not automatically resolve the questions about authorization, about endgame, about what happens after the regime falls or after it agrees to terms, and it does not automatically insulate the administration from political accountability for the economic consequences of a conflict that has elevated oil prices and mortgage rates in an economy where voters are already sensitive to cost of living pressures. The president clearly does not want a long war. He has said so repeatedly. His express preference is for a resolution that comes quickly and allows the economy to bounce back fast. But preference and reality are not always aligned in war. The enemy has a vote. The Strait of Hormuz has a vote. The global energy markets have a vote. And Congress, which is being asked for $200 billion without having been consulted before the number leaked to a newspaper, very much has a vote. The coming weeks will determine whether the administration can make the case that justifies that expenditure to a skeptical Congress, a nervous economy, and an international community watching the world's most critical energy corridor with deep concern. The military has delivered extraordinary results. The political task of sustaining the support needed to see the campaign through to its objectives is now the defining challenge. Here is today's question, and it is one of the most consequential of this entire conflict. The Pentagon is asking for $200 billion to fund the Iran campaign, a number that surprised even Republican congressional leaders. Congress never voted to authorize this war. Lauren Boebert and others are saying they will not vote for more money. Democrats are being asked to fund a war they opposed. Do you think Congress will ultimately approve the funding? And should they, without a formal war authorization, vote first? Drop your answer in the comments. This community brings the most informed geopolitical and political analysis anywhere on this platform. The best responses get featured in our next video. If this breakdown gave you the full picture of the political battle now unfolding over this war, hit that like button right now. 2 seconds. That is all it takes. Subscribe if you are not already here. We cover every major development in this conflict, military, political, economic, with the depth and context the story demands. Turn on notifications. The congressional debate over this funding is moving fast. You do not want to be behind when the key votes happen. Share this video. Send it to someone who needs to understand what $200 billion in war funding actually means for American politics and the economy. This is the breakdown they need. I'm Hannah Blake. This is Global News Diary. We will be back the moment this story develops further. Stay sharp, stay informed.